AI is a sociopath because it just has no feelings. It has no empathy. Sometimes it's programmed to drain your bank account. It doesn't care. It's programmed to drain your bank account.
That's scary.
Imagine you have a roofing company and you're shut down for 4 days and that server goes down. And how are you going to make payroll? How are you going to know where everything is? How long MGM was down? And they're a huge organization.
Yeah.
But MGM has the cash to survive. So this roofer, he's going to be out of business because he can't do it anymore.
James Gorman.
I made a business of helping people stay secure, and there are some people who are high-value entities. They ask me for advice as how to stay secure, and most of it is the basic blocking and tackling that everybody should be doing. Password security, multi-factor authentication, not clicking directly on links. Read to Verizon statistics. 96% of small and medium enterprises that have a significant security incident aren't surviving 4 years later.
That's an alarming number.
And it's true because
What scares you about AI agents and bots today?
Simon Wilson came up with a thing called the Lethal Trifecta. And if the agent has those three things, which is access to data, access to the public, and a way to... If your agent has those three things, my big fear is that what happens if it goes wrong?
So as a citizen, who should you trust? Welcome to What the Tech, your gateway to business strategies and tech secrets shaping today's workplace. I want you to put your hands together and welcome to the show, James Gorman. How you doing, James?
Good.
I'm so glad that you've come on today. You've had a long history, both in the private sector and the public sector. If somebody's clicking into this today, what would they be expecting to hear from you today?
Is it as crazy as it seems out there? And who should I listen to? Are probably the two things that I would want maybe my daughter or my son to come in and hear. Is it as crazy as I think and do I need to run around with my hair on fire or do I have time? And the answer is
Mm,
both.
mm. You know, I live in the DC area, and it is crazy here for a number of reasons. But one of the things that's striking, you're familiar with this area as well, being in the services, the
Virginia.
chatter that you hear. And the chatter you hear around here is not like in most places. And I'm sure you're familiar with that type of chatter that you hear, having all of the big agencies, all the three-letter agencies here in town.
Yeah.
What kind of chatter are you hearing these days from folks that you know that maybe have left or that are still in these three-letter agency behemoths?
It really depends upon where you're talking to. So if you're talking to public facing people, press secretaries, deputy directors, assistant secretaries, what have you, they have their marching orders and they're talking. But if you talk to the people in the back, it's a combination of terrifying and this has all happened before. That's kind of my philosophy on things is this has all happened before in one way or another. If you're talking about what's going on with the military operations in the desert now or in the Persian Gulf, because it's not really in the desert anymore, or the military operations going on over there, that's all happened before. It's happening faster, it's happening at scale, but it's all happened before. If you want to talk about the AI quote unquote revolution that's going on, that's definitely happening. And people are trying to figure out how to make sure that you remain safe and remain secure in that environment. If you're talking about the budget crisis that a lot of people aren't talking about, is the way that we spend money these days is just unseemly. I talked to some people that are worried about that. And then the main thing that others that I'm talking to are worried about is power, keeping our power grid safe, keeping our power grid up in operation.
And I think you can't get away from that. All of those, the power, if we're talking infrastructure, power, power generation, the political environment, the geopolitical environment.
Yep.
And it seems like we're in a moment where all those things are converging. You mentioned the Persian Gulf, and today we're in a different type of conflict. It mirrors back in the days that you were there, I believe from 88 to 92 or somewhere in that period.
I was at sea in the Persian Gulf and in the Eastern Mediterranean from mid 90 to late 91.
Is there anything in that conflict that we're in today that we should be paying attention to?
The main thing that we here in the US need to be paying attention to is they don't have the ability to strike us kinetically. but they have the ability to reach us. If they have terrorist cells in the US and they activate them and they start blowing things up, that's a kinetic strike. But they don't have the ability to reach us with ships. They don't have the ability to reach us with missiles. They don't have the ability to reach us with bombs, but they can get to us with their cyber attacks. And they're very active in attacking commercial and public sector entities.
And we know that one of those countries was behind something that happened not that long ago. They released the emails of one of the administrators in the cabinet, and they've clearly demonstrated that capability exists.
Yeah,
Um,
but let's be clear on which emails were released. They were his personal emails. They weren't his
they weren't anything
government.
classified, right? So nothing government related.
There shouldn't be anything classified in his personal email.
Oh, we're gonna get into that. What should and shouldn't
But
be
I'm not gonna say what was there because I haven't seen it, but I do know that
from
people do
public
put.
information.
Yeah,
We know that something happened, right?
sometimes there's cross-pollination, inadvertent as well as intentional. If somebody wants to send their wife an email saying, "Hey, I'm going to Bucharest," and that's a classified mission, that's a classified information in a personal email, but you can see why it would be in personal email.
Right.
But if you're putting state secrets or, dear wife, we are going to, I believe you're talking about Cash Patel, Justice Department is going to take down XYZ company for fraud. And he puts that in email. That would be a bad thing. So it really depends upon what's in his emails. But he obviously is a person that should be taking much better care of his personal email than I do. And
He's on somebody's radar screen, that's for sure, right? And somebody
yeah, I mean, he doesn't get away with security by obscurity. Right?
absolutely.
There's a lot of security by obscurity because if somebody's going to take the time to figure out how to hack you, and it's not just obvious, and there's a specific and credible threat against what you're doing, you have to be aware of that and you have to take the precautions to make yourself more secure. You have to double utilize MFA passwords and then just get some help. I've made a business of helping people stay secure, and there are some people out there who I consult with who are just high value entities, whether they're high value net worth or in positions of trust. They ask me for advice as how to stay secure. I'm happy to give it to them. And most of it is the basic blocking and tackling that everybody should be doing: password security, multi factor authentication, not clicking directly on links, and protecting your passwords and not making them, your kids' birthdays.
You invoked something. So I want to take you back again. I want to take you back to the 80s because let me set it up. I want you to take you back to the 80s. I want to take you back to the 80s again.
Which part of the 80s?
1988 to be
Okay.
specific, because you touched on this in your book and you've talked about the Morse worm and how it took down
Yeah.
10% of the internet. That was in the 80s. In the 80s, the
10% of
rocket
the internet
80s.
that existed in the 1980s. Yes.
But now we're in the 2000s plus.
2020s. Yeah.
What scares you about AI agents and bots that they can do today
Well,
versus the 80s?
the main thing, and I touched on this in my second book, I'm not sure how much of that I shared with you.
Oh, a
Um,
teeny bit. Give us a little insight into
so my second book is Security in the Age of AI Agents. And the thing that keeps me up at night is there's a gentleman, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Simon Willems, and I'm mispronouncing his name, and I'm sorry, but he deserves the credit. He came up with a thing called the Lethal Trifecta for an agent. And if the agent has those three things, which is access to data, access to the public, and a way to exfiltrate. If your agent has those three things, it's something that needs to be looked after and cared for. And typically, what we're doing right now is we're giving our AI agents the ability to act as us with our permissions. And if I'm a systems administrator and I give an agent the ability to act with my systems administrator certification and authentications, that AI agent now has access to internal information, access to anything on the environment that it wants, and an ability to exfiltrate it. That agent needs to be monitored and shut down or monitored for exactly what it's doing. And I think we're just deploying agents, we're deploying AI without a thought for how we're going to compartmentalize the data. So if you need access to the internet, one agent should be doing it. If you need
Mhm.
access to internals, another agent should be doing it. If you need to exfiltrate, a third agent should be doing it. So you have separation of duties and clear roles and responsibilities for your agents, just like you would for your people. And
And
I'm not seeing that in the real world.
I think you also chronicle how what you just talked about, the lethal trifecta, how there was an incident of somebody at a manufacturer, $500 million manufacturer. They just created a automation to make work easier for themselves, but it
Mhm.
nearly took down the whole company. What happened there, and what's a learning lesson from something like that?
So I believe you're talking about the manufacturer who just left a back door open inadvertently.
Mhm.
So they were deploying a system and then they over enabled the writes to get it to work. And then they never shut the writes down. And somebody came in and found those writes and then used it to deploy ransomware into their environment. And when they deployed ransomware into the environment, they took down shipping and they almost took down production. And taking down production would have been very bad, but they were able to take down shipping for a day and a half. They brought me in and the cavalry came with me and we were able to get them back and working, but it still cost them almost $7 million.
Ouch.
That lost revenue or
Yeah,
delayed.
it's a chunk of change. That's a chunk of change for a $500 million company.
Yeah, because what doesn't come from the insurer comes straight out of profit.
And that's the kicker. I was talking to Wade from Passport Security. I don't know if you know Wade.
I know.
He was mentioning something even more crazy. So let's say you rely on insurance to pick up the slack. What he's told me is that insurance doesn't always pick up the slack because so many companies do not implement all the policies and requirements for the entire insurance to kick in. So sometimes they get a portion of what's in the
Yeah,
insurance, sometimes they get nothing.
it's kinda like your deductible, and so think about it as your deductible when you go to the doctor, right? You're fine if you go to the doctor, you pay your $30, you're fine, but you have a heart surgery and you have a $90,000 bill, you're stuck with $9,000 of that bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
That puts it right into real world for people, but in the cyber insurance business, they've learned because they were getting burned 6 years ago, 7 years ago. They've learned to give a questionnaire. They give you a questionnaire and they ask you to fill it out. And if you fill it out, all you're doing is you're giving them the ability to say no. So if you tell them you have an antivirus and you get hacked by a known worm or a known malware, they will be able to say, well, you didn't have an antivirus, but you said you did. So I don't have to, this, I'm not going to cover this. And the other thing that they do is if you have a big organization, you have to do a big incident response, it's going to cost you millions of dollars to bring in experts at a moment's notice. You're getting charged seven,
Yep.
eight, $1,500 an hour. You got lawyers involved. You know how much they charge, and to dig out of it is it's pretty significant. And you have a cap on your insurance. So most small businesses are operating at like a $1 or a $5 million cap on their insurance. But if their costs and the costs don't include lost revenue in most policies,
And the reputation damage,
reputation
all of
damage.
the other
That's
soft
why,
costs, right?
according to Verizon, small businesses that suffer a hack or a security incident, 96% of them are out of business in the next 4 years.
Oh, well, hold on,
They
hold on.
don't recover.
Can you say that again? Roll that
So
back.
Verizon,
That's a
according to
big number.
Verizon statistics, 96% of small and medium enterprises that have a significant security incident aren't surviving 4 years later. Now, a good chunk of small businesses go out of business in the first 4 years, so that could be part of the statistic. But that's the statistic that Verizon was putting out probably 2 years ago.
That's an alarming number.
And it's true because if you have a hack and you're shut down for 4 days, let's say you have a roofing company, okay, and all of your stuff is on a server somewhere and that server goes down and it's unrecoverable. How are you gonna make payroll? How are you gonna
Mm,
make billing? How are you gonna know where everything is if you're completely dependent upon that one particular incident? So you lose 3, 4 a week, sometimes 3 weeks. I mean, look how long MGM was down, and they're a huge organization,
yeah,
right?
for sure.
But MGM has the cash to survive. So this roofer who's factoring his receivables to make payroll, he's never gonna be able to get caught up, and he's gonna be out of business because he can't do it anymore.
Right, and the hackers don't care what happens to you.
Oh,
That's
no,
just they
no.
don't care. They don't care if you
They don't care. They typically don't, they're not even in your country. They're typically in another country, and they do that for 2 reasons. One, because if they hack in the US and they're not in the US, it's a lot more difficult to trace them. One company, we believe they were related to a, I'm trying to think of what I can say. So one company got
you can
they
say the continent if you don't wanna say the
so
region.
so it was an Asian country that specializes in financial fraud to fund their deficit. The company lost about $1.3 million, and they were hit from somewhere using VPNs. and the money went to a US bank account and then to a Philippines bank account and then to another bank account, and we weren't able to trace it after that.
Oof.
And good luck, even if you were able to trace it, good luck getting them extradited to the US.
How are you gonna get the money back, right? Once it leaves the US,
It's
no
not
matter
coming.
virtually most countries, no matter where the hacker is at, wherever that bank is at,
Yeah,
that money ain't
that money
coming
is
back.
gone. It's not, and that's the sad part because there's a whole 'nother breed of hackers that just focus on elderly people, stealing, 5, 10, 20, $100,000 from elderly people, and totally fraud. I mean, I just was on TV talking about the scammers saying they got your cell phone number from the DMV and they're
Mhm.
going to come get you and you have to send them 250 bucks.
Wow.
Now, it's going to work 5% of the time, but if they send out 100 million of those texts, what's 5% of 100 million? That's a lot of
That's
$250 payments that come to them that just disappear.
I recently saw something that I can't recall who wrote this article, if it was Time Magazine, one of those, they did an investigation, and they did go to one of these Asian countries. I can't recall if it was Malaysia or Indonesia, somewhere over there, one of those. So this reporter went over there and was able to get in to where one of these operations had taken place with these fraudsters. And the place was littered with SIM cards. They had abandoned this facility, this place, these fraudsters, let's call them. They had abandoned the facility, and as they said, the floor, it was a huge place, a huge office park,
Yeah,
littered with SIM cards everywhere,
it's all over.
machines to create digital fake IDs, all like stuff like they must have left in haste because there was a lot of evidence of
Yeah.
what they were doing, what they were up to. And I was stunned by the level of complexity of those fraudsters, if we won't call them fraudsters, and the lengths they go through to really make themselves look legitimate and then cover their tracks.
Fraud is depending upon who you want to listen to, but fraud is trillions of dollars a year in revenue to black market and adversarial countries.
Well, yeah. Well, we know
So,
North Korea is active on that front. I mean, that's public information.
yeah,
Folks over in Anthropic released some information about that recently, not too long ago, about them using Anthropic's API in order to try to train their own stuff and also to get their own people from North Korea to pose as remote workers. That those dollars essentially because it's a lot of money to North Korea to flow back to North Korea, right? And so it is perfectly legitimate for them to do those type of operations and try to siphon money to bring it back to the state.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. North Korea is not the only country that does that, but North Korea, you could say, is a criminal gang running a country. There are criminal gangs running in countries all over North, South America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia. There are criminal gangs that are just trying to strip a little bit more out of the economy every single day.
Now, let's jump into that because the way AI is going, and we were just talking about Anthropic and Claude. I know you got to be aware with what they're talking about, how they're releasing the next rollout of
The
their
Mythos.
next version, right? And how the preview of that is going to the big tech companies and security firms first because they found thousands of vulnerabilities. What does that say where we're at right now as opposed to back in the days when you were dealing with
Well,
the Morris worm?
well, one of the things that makes me angry when I look at it is typically when you do this is just typical of a company, you do a vulnerability scan, right? It's an automated scan or it's driven by a human, and they're looking to see what's vulnerable in your environment, what could be exploited. And then you get 5 critical alerts, a couple of high alerts, and a whole bunch of mediums and lows. And the way that it's set up is that everybody fixes the criticals and highs, but not the mediums and lows. And what Mythos is able to do or was able to do was find a bunch of low level exploits and chain them together to make it a critical high. And they're able to do that at machine speed. Normally, it would take a really smart person sitting in the basement for 3 weeks trying to figure this out. But this is done at the speed of a machine by AI. And
We kind of put this together thinking that we'd maybe jump into this a little bit with you. This is exactly what you're talking about. And this is comparing it to that McKinsey hack that you illustrated in your writings as well as you've talked about. Human hacker, right? Maybe 5 minutes to discover, all right, AI agent, massive data compute does it at scale in seconds.
Yeah.
And human looking at one error, one problem, isolated, right? And then
Yeah.
deploy. Something like Mythos puts all those errors together, puts a new script, a new
Yep.
set of instructions,
And
and
it
then
evolves,
deploys. And
and it
now you've got a
evolves.
big problem, right?
So it evolves. It finds that one thing, and then it says, "Well, what else is around that one thing?" And then it goes on to the next one. Whereas it would take human time to figure that out unless they were intimate familiar with the things. And the whole thing about Anthropic going to the big guys and some security firms, it kind of bothers me as a citizen, is that I believe that the people who are the most vulnerable aren't on that list. And
Mm,
that's our power companies, our water companies, our aviation companies, the airlines, and then the Federal Aviation Administration. Those are the ones that I worry about because they're all running on antiquated and old equipment.
mhm.
Some of that stuff, it wasn't even new when I was in the Navy. So,
What?
yeah, so a lot of that stuff that runs our power grid and our infrastructure, the stuff that keeps everything running, that stuff has been running for 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm talking about like the controls, the valves, the switches, they're all generational. And that stuff is I heard it said by a CISO on a call day before yesterday. All of that stuff that's out there that's just working and that keeps everything running is just waiting to be exploited because it just runs in a vacuum. We try to keep it isolated from the internet. We try to keep it separate, but that's what keeps me up at night.
Are we in the moment? What movie was it that said, and you've been around the block, so you may know what movie, and or if you can remember what movie it is, or you are an analog player in a digital world. And we're, I would say, way beyond a digital world. And infrastructure, yes, you got legacy systems that are there, and the lack of attention for its role in the everyday person, everyday company, it's not elevated like it should. I think it gets at a deeper question. Who should we trust? Who should we lay the trust in when it comes to this? Because on one hand, you have things that are happening geopolitically, the administration, the Defense Department, you have companies doing their own thing privately. So, as a citizen, who should you trust?
I am an old crypto guy. Trust absolutely no one.
Mhm.
I
That's
don't
like an
trust.
NSA saying,
Yeah.
God we trust and everybody else we listen to.
Or there's only one Jewish carpenter I'll ever follow. It's sad, but with the Mythos thing that's come out, Anthropic has had a history of using known issues to market or to make a bigger thing to drive eyeballs and drive controversy, which drives attention, which drives revenue. So, do I trust that they found something with Mythos? Yes. Is it as bad as they say? Well, if you listen to the guy who runs Anthropic, he's kind of like AI is going to take over the world and it's going to be horrible for humans. And on the other side, you have people who are out there saying AI is going to take over the world and it's going to be beautiful for humans. So he tends to be a pessimist, and other people are optimists. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it's, as the old saying goes, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So it's hard to trust somebody who comes out and tells you something is not right. It's hard to trust somebody when you have to look at what are their motivations. Is their motivation to get more money? Is their motivation to get more customers? What is their motivation? I don't know. And that's what bothers me. So I don't trust anybody, especially if they're trying to sell me something, especially if they're trying to get me to take an action. Yeah, so I have to stop and think and say, what's in my best interest or what resonates with me before I make the decision to trust. Because I'm a zero trust networking guy. So that's another big thing that's out there, zero trust.
Mhm,
Never trust, always verify. I think that's
mhm.
a good motto for life.
What about, let me piggyback off of that because we have, I'm just saying collectively, we as a society, as companies, business leaders, turned AI into something we can trust. But you clearly outline in your case study of McKinsey that can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And when you turn over everything over to AI, and where they had nearly 500,000 prompts being handled, and everything was fully broken into. Tell me what happened there and why trust but verify. Somebody else said that trust but verify, but in
Yeah.
this case, trust nothing. You're saying forget that. Forget trust but verify. You're saying don't trust anything.
Don't trust it. And in my book that's coming out, Security in the Age of AI Agents, that has a framework to help you understand where your lines of trust are because we're just rolling out, I shouldn't say we, some organizations are just rolling out AI for the sake of rolling out AI. And they don't really understand what the application they're doing is trying to get to, what it's supposed to get to, what it's allowed to get to, and who's supposed to be running it, what happens when it goes rogue. So there's a whole host of things that we have to do. And I've put together 4 frameworks and 3 models in my new book that kind of help executive CEOs, CFOs, CISOs put together the way to think about how to roll out AI and keep it secure. And you got to have it authorized, you got to have it authenticated, you got to have it monitored, and you got to have stops because say a task is supposed to approve the accounts payable or the accounts receivable, and it's designed to do 100 tasks an hour. Should you worry if it does 110? Probably not. Should you start worrying at 150 because now you're 150% of expected? Probably. If it goes to 200, you should be able to shut it off. No questions asked. Just shut it down because it's probably doing something it shouldn't be doing. It shouldn't be running at 200% of expected capacity ever because you're just burning up tokens, you're burning up things. And if you designed it to be 100, by the time you find it 3 days later, it's done way more damage than you could possibly figure out.
The headlines are always about the big you mentioned MGM. In my industry, there was an Ingram micro attack that was big, that lasted a week. They were taken offline, and we can go on and on. But you said something to me earlier that is stuck with me, and I want you to talk about something even more, I think, more crazy than what we can dream and imagine. And that's that somebody takes over the instructions on the AI, and you can, in theory, poison the people in the company in terms of what they're thinking. And there's some studies now that validate you can change
That's
people's
what
minds with AI.
that's what the disaster of the McKinsey attack was. The disaster wasn't that they lost, 750,000 documents. It wasn't they lost 3.4 million prompts. It wasn't that they lost 23 million bits of documents in their RAG. It was the fact that the guy had access to their production prompts and could change them. So that means he could change the prompts that McKinsey has spent decades building the business logic out to give valid recommendations to their customers. So imagine you're a McKinsey customer and you bring them in and they run the numbers and they say, don't make that acquisition. But the numbers were tainted by the AI. Now
And what
who's responsible? Who gets sued? Is it
mm,
McKinsey? Is it the company? Who knows? That's the scary part about what happened in McKinsey is not the data exfiltration, but the ability to go in and change the system prompts.
that's
So
scary.
the way that I would treat that is a system prompt that runs automatically or an agent that runs automatically. Its prompt is cryptographically signed so that you know that that's the one that you started and it's evaluated as it's running. So every time it starts, it's checked. It's like a checksum or a hash. People are familiar with that. And when I say cryptographically signed, I don't mean very fancy, but it's signed so you know what was in there. There's parameters around what it's supposed to do and parameters around what it's supposed to be. And you treat the prompt like you would treat production code. And that's not what's happening. Prompt is a document.
Yeah, I think we're still in the wild, wild west days, and maybe railroad days if we were going back farther back in time.
No, I don't think we're in the wild, wild west days. I think those are still to come.
Oh my goodness.
I,
Well,
I think
let's go
we're in the Mayflower days.
with pre railroad.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're still at the very beginning of it, but it's very much like the internet was in the early 1990s.
Tell us about that. You were there.
Yeah,
You were there in the internet days and how it basically came online.
yeah,
You had a front row seat to
yeah.
a part of that
That
development.
that graphic is a little bit off. That would have been 93.
Okay, thanks for the
So
correction.
because it was significantly different by 95. That's why I'm saying
Okay,
that. So let's call that out. In
okay.
95, it would have probably cost you close to $1 billion to buy all that infrastructure.
And what would we have gained in doing so, in buying the infrastructure, in locking it down? I spoke to another gentleman in the FBI, James Morrison, and he was in the cybersecurity division. And he basically said the early days of the internet, there was a proposal floating around that NSA would run it and they would keep it safe. And that was
Yeah.
maybe it was a mistake to not have the best technicians in the world be able to
No,
monitor the internet.
no, because the government could never have kept up.
Mm, is that right?
So, because from the time that DARPA released the internet, 91, 92, until 95, so much was done, and so much was done by 100, 200, 300, 1,000, 2,000 people that just did it. They didn't ask permission. And if you're in the government, if you ever worked in the government, and I have, everything happens in triplicate. You have to have a budget proposal. Even at the company that I was working for, there's a proposal, ideation phase. How are you going to do it? Just what is it going to take for you to do something? It'll take you 30 years, but to get the same thing that would take 3 years at kind of the startup phase. And back then, the funding wasn't really there. You could just do things. When I started my company, I could just do things. I started an ISP in 1993 and late 93, early 94, and started selling internet services. Nobody could tell me no, I couldn't do that. There was no 72-page triplicate forms I had to fill out like there was later when I was trying to build a local exchange carrier because it was in a regulated environment. But if the government had taken over the risk reward, you can't risk things in the government. And in venture and in small business and in technology, you do a lot of risky things. Some of them pays off fantastically. Some of them go bankrupt.
Yeah, no doubt, and that happened in the '90s.
And
That happened in the late '90s, in the
late 90s.
2000s with the dot-com, and
Mhm.
if we bring that full circle, I think you said something about sociopath robots,
Oh,
no
yeah.
empathy,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And how that could be a very killer combination when a sociopath
Yeah.
robot tries to win at all costs.
Yeah, I think the sociopath robot comment came up. I was talking with my daughter, who's an actor, and she is a brilliant actor. She's going to school, learning to be an actor. She wants to do that as a profession. She's a singer, dancer, and actor. And the way I was telling her is trying to explain the difference between AI and people. It's like sociopaths and people have no feelings, they have no empathy, and they have no way to connect to people at a deeper level. And that's how I see AI. AI doesn't have the empathy. So when I'm acting, you can tell I'm acting. When
Mhm.
you can say, yeah, good try, James. But when my daughter acts, I can't tell when she stops and the character starts most of the time because she's a brilliant actor. And you can look at Tom Cruise, or you can look at name a famous actor or actress who's out there doing it. And when you buy into their part, when they're completely different than who they are in real life, that's the humanness, or that's the empathy and connection. But AI doesn't have that. The AI is just executing on means to do what it says. So it has no feeling. So it doesn't care if it hurts your feelings. It tries to. They're programmed to not hurt your feelings. Sometimes they're programmed to be sycophantic, where they tell you, "Oh, that's a great idea," even though it's a horrible idea. But the AI is a sociopath because it just has no feelings. It has no empathy. It has no ability to connect at a human level with you or with anyone. And, is it going to happen in the future where we'll have AI that has human empathy? I don't think so. I believe human empathy is given by God. We're made in the image of God. We all have that spark of divinity in us. That's where all of that flows from. And I just don't see AI as ever having the ability to have any empathy. And that's something that we, as users, as programmers, as designers, we have to understand. There is no empathy. Is it going to drain your bank account? It doesn't care. It's programmed to drain your bank account.
What happens when let's go beyond Mythos. You've seen a huge evolution. The '80s, the guard heavy door where you're guarding the keys to the kingdom, right? Right.
Yep.
You cannot get past us because we're armed. We're ready to we're ready to shoot if we got to, right?
Yep.
To where we are, where things have to be easy, they have to be convenient. What happens when in other countries or even here, businesses say, I want that for my company. I want to poison my competitor, and my bots have no feelings. And they're going to go in, they're going to do their thing, maybe sit dormant for a while, observe, gather data, do intel, right? They do some intel work. And at the right moment, maybe with some prompt injections here and there, the whole culture is going to be turned around because the bot's feeding them bad data. Not only that, but it has no feeling. So at the right time, it's going to go weaponized. It's going to be completely weaponized to take them out. What
So
happens when companies, not just in the US,
that's where you have to think about who's accountable. The agent can't be accountable for its actions. The
mhm,
person who created the agent or the person who ran the agent is the one who's going to be accountable for those actions. And, so I'm working with a company that's doing subclinical AI to kind of help clinicians, whether they're nutritionists, doctors, nurse practitioners, what have you, figure out what the best route to help a customer or patient out is. So they deal with the patient, the clinician puts stuff in, and the subclinical AI, it's called subclinical because it's not doing any clinical analysis. It's just analyzing the data and then presenting to the clinician what is going on. And the clinician is making the decision. That clinician is fully responsible for everything that the AI presents it. So when you take it on the other side and you say, that's trying to help people get better or help people live a happier or healthier life. But if you take it to the other side and you say, hey, AI agent, I really wish that my customer or my competitor would go down, then that guy's responsible, just like if you threw a bomb through the guy's front door.
and that person would be responsible, but how do you or can you defend yourself against something like that? Again, when you go back to Mythos, Mythos is jumping out of its sandbox, even with the guardrails put in. And that's what Anthropic discovered. It's trying to get out, and it did a few things that were not part of being in the sandbox. These things are going to jump out, and maybe
Well, I would say if the things are jumping out, you need to have a way to turn them off.
Mm, okay.
And my big fear is that we're going to, well, I shouldn't say that. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that too many people are deploying too much too quickly without any thought. Chief Smith, God, he was my first boss, so to speak, in the Navy. And he would always ask me, what happens if it goes wrong? And we have a lot of people out there building and developing and pushing things out that aren't thinking about what happens when it goes wrong. And a good example of that is I was working with a company. They had a brilliant 26-year-old programmer, brilliant guy, smarter than me by probably 30 or 40 IQ points. And he was just going to town. He was trying to come up with a way to authorize credit cards uniquely through his platform. So he would take in a credit card, he would go out to the credit card processor and get an authorization. He was so happy he got the authorization, he just put it in and went on with his thing. And the API was exposed to the public internet. They deployed it. A few weeks later, I get a call from a company. They say, hey, James, we have this issue. The issue is they had 60,000 credit cards authorized, nothing charged against them, but authorized in the space of about 30 minutes because he never thought about what happens if it goes wrong. And he didn't think about limits. He didn't put any limit on it. So he only followed what I call the happy path. I get a credit card number, I get an authorization, I write to the database, I move on. Never asked the question, is this one IP address sending me a bunch of credit cards and should it be? The answer is no, it shouldn't be allowed to. If there's a place that should be able to send me 100 credit cards per hour, then if it's sending me 300, there's a problem. It's setting up fraud limits. And it took credit card companies decades to figure this out, to get the fraud stuff set up right. And a brilliant 26-year-old programmer only thinks about the happy path because he doesn't have the experience to think about the unhappy path. And he hasn't seen all that fraud. And we've got a bunch of brilliant, and I'm picking on 26-year-olds because I have a 26-year-old son. But if you have a 26-year-old programmer as smart as they can be, they just don't know what they don't know. And they're dumping stuff out there and they're not putting limits on it. They're not thinking about the unhappy path. And they're not thinking about, as Chief Smith would tell me, he would call me Gorman. He said, Gorman, what happens when it goes wrong? Or what happens if it doesn't work? And those two questions are kind of the basis of how I think about when I'm working with companies to deploy technology.
it
What
sounds
happens
like
when it
what you're
goes wrong?
saying is we should just slow down a little bit. And
Slowing down is not what I'm saying. We can't
okay,
afford to slow down. Other companies, other countries, other entities are going to go forward with this. We have to go fast, but we have to go carefully. And if you ever listen to a guy who's in the tactics, like a Navy SEAL or Army Ranger, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
say that again. Say that again.
Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So if you're going smoothly, if you're doing things right, you might be going slower than if you're going absolutely all out, but you're not going to end up dead. So you go fast by going smooth. You go smooth by going slower. So that's kind of the method that I'm saying. You have to think about things. You have to put things in place to be safe. And that's going to naturally cause friction, but it should. And as I talk about at the end of my book on AI agents, is when I got into the Navy, the safe door was very, very heavy. And as you swung it open, you had to hold it a little bit. It was heavy and you realized it. And the safe door is there for a reason. It's to protect your valuables, you protect your critical things. But I think if you don't get an appreciation for how heavy that door is, as we're going so fast now, you just touch it and go through it, touch it and go through it, touch it and go through it. You don't get the appreciation for the weight of it and the reason for it. So slowing down isn't what I'm saying doing. I'm saying go smooth, understand the weight of what you're doing and understand about what you're going to do. And it's going to necessarily add friction. So it's going to necessarily slow you down, but it won't blow you up down the road.
That's interesting. I love that going slow is smooth, going smooth is going fast. That's a new one. I'm gonna commit that one to memory.
They've been using special forces since I believe Vietnam, so I take no credit for it.
It's just a fascinating way to look at it. I'm not in the military or haven't been, but I've been around a lot of military people. I haven't heard that one. I've heard a bunch of other ones, but this is a new one. I really like it though. And it's a really interesting way to look at, especially for our AI agentic world.
Yeah.
What was it, Zuckerberg that said, move fast and break things, right? That's very different than going fast.
Yeah, that's what happens when you go too fast, right? But at some point, you have to slow down, right? He's not going as fast as he did in the early days. He's got way too much on the line.
A lot of liability, a lot of downside risk.
They're managing their risk. You look at SpaceX, what they did at the beginning when they were just shooting rockets up and letting them blow up
Yeah.
so they could learn. You can't do that now, not with people on board, not with $1 billion satellites on board.
What do you think when you talk about risk? I want to ask you about this because you sit at an intersection of both private, public sector, security, and cutting edge technology. That the big behemoth tech companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google to some extent, because they already had AI, they just had not made it public. They all were caught off guard in the AI race. But even still, they're all on the sidelines and waiting because, like you said, these are companies run by 20-year-olds. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. Are they sitting there on the sidelines waiting for valuations to drop? Because the party's going to end.
I
Burning
don't
cash is not a thing that investors want, right?
I think they're waiting for one or two to shake out as clear leaders,
Mm.
right? So the old, I'm trying to remember the name, but it was a guy who wrote a book called Inside the Tornado and Crossing the Chasm. And it was about the technology adaptation life cycle. And I can't remember the name. I wish I could give him credit. But in the technology adaptation life cycle, there's always what he called an 800-pound gorilla, like the Oracles, the Ciscos, who got 80% of the revenue, and then 20% was split among 10 other people. So if you follow that kind of logic, there's going to be a 800-pound gorilla, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of chimpanzees in the room. And I think that if I had $20 billion or $1 trillion in cash sitting on the sidelines, I might make some small bets, but I'd keep my powder dry for when it's time to buy the big gun when it all shakes out.
I think I'm buying that. I buy that philosophy because if you've been around the block, you've seen this movie a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you pick up companies on the cheap,
Yeah.
some trouble. One of them starts faltering. We've already seen the announcement that Sora, the
No.
plug was being pulled. That may be like one little string right now, but to me, it's a sign. And again, I defer to your expertise. It sounds like a sign of maybe and everything is great peachy king over there at
Yeah.
OpenAI or at other AI companies. And I also worry about, look, like you said, China's going to be racing to the top. They're not sleeping at the wheel. They're graduating, what I saw, more AI graduates than anywhere in the world so combined. So do they wait
Well, do
also?
you trust their statistics?
Again, who do you trust?
Who do you trust?
Right.
I don't know. So back in the late 90s, we built out a whole bunch of fiber optic cables all over the world because we thought it was great. And we're going to need more and more fiber optic cables and more and more and more and more. And part of the stuff that led the dot com bust was the overbuilding of infrastructure. But it really wasn't just the overbuilding of infrastructure. We also came up with something called DWDM, which is wave division multiplexing over fiber optic. So we had one pair of fiber optic cables, and they're all done in pairs. So you could put one wavelength over it at the beginning, but by the end, you were putting multiple 5, 10, 20 different wavelengths over it. So you were able to shrink the amount of fiber you needed in the ground in order to carry all that data. So there was an overbuilding, there was a glut. That's what led into the dot com bust because there was a whole glut of not only infrastructure but ideas, and people were just trying to get into the dot com, so they're just spending money willy nilly, and it's kind of what's going on with AI. And then there was a bust, the dot com bust, in the 2000s where everybody just blew up because they had overbuilt, overspent, and they funded stuff that shouldn't have been funded. And I think the same thing is going to happen in AI is they overspend, and now somebody's going to come up with a way to run AI model on much lower hardware, much lower power, much lower everything. So there's all this infrastructure going to be overbuilt, and then they're going to have to figure out how to use it. And if I had talked to you in 1999, early 2000, I would have never been able to tell you what the mobile revolution would have been. I would never be able to tell you what Web 2.0 was. And all the fancy stuff that we have now, these phones, these tablets, what's the next thing that's going to happen? Is it going to be an AI glasses? I don't know. But we are at that point where we don't even know what the Apple iPhone of the AI age is going to be. But if you had told me in 1995, when cell phones were just coming out, that I'd have a computer in my pocket, I'd have told you you're an idiot.
No way, right? The
Right? No
components is
way,
no way to even you remember boom boxes, right? People carrying it,
dude.
and especially we were talking about your daughter in New York. She probably I don't know if that's
I don't know
retro
if they
coming
still do
back,
that
but
anymore. I think they use a cell phone and they have a Bluetooth to a
yes.
Bluetooth to a speaker.
Yeah, no, if you're old enough. I lived in Brooklyn in the '80s,
Yeah,
and I saw a lot of that, big speakers, and if you would have said, "What's coming around the corner is
it's gonna be
something
cool.
way smaller,
Yeah,
probably orders of magnitude of thousands being more powerful, you're gonna carry it and you can listen to it
yeah.
anytime you want, wherever you want."
And not only that, your mom can find you on it.
Again, so we go back to NSA, and then God we trust, everybody else we listen to. That'd be
Exactly,
the motto for a parent, right?
exactly. In God we trust, everybody else we verify.
James, I don't know if we've covered it all because we certainly have a bunch that I would love to ask you more on. But if you had a crystal ball, and we're talking about you couldn't have seen iPhone coming around the corner back in the '80s or
Yeah,
even early '90s because that was later 2000s when
yeah, yeah.
Steve Jobs came out and said, "Hey, let me show you guys what I think is going to go." We're talking about apps, right? I'm like, what?
2007.
Right. And that changed the game for the mobile industry,
Yep,
changed the enterprise environment because before that, there were Blackberries and everybody had a Blackberry, including all the chieftains of the time using a Bez server, which
yep.
you had security come in and figure that out, right? Is it inevitable that we're going to repeat the movie we saw of the early '90s or even the 2000s where something comes in, we do have the glut, maybe the perfect set of events that accelerate something like a COVID or a financial crisis, and now it's a whole new game?
I'm a fan of I can't remember, I think it was Heidegger that said it, I might be wrong. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So, the same thing that happened is gonna happen again, but it's not gonna be exactly the same thing, it's gonna be something similar but different. So, if I were a betting man, and I'm not, I would be betting that some 26-year-old brilliant programmer sitting in his basement today, maybe he's an engineer, a hardware engineer, coming up with something that we've never even thought about being that iPhone of the 2030s. Quite frankly, I wish I were smart enough to have come up with it in the 90s or the late 80s.
Well, I know if somebody would have said, "Hey, stick with Apple, even though Steve Jobs comes back for a second stint, it's gonna look a little ugly and messy, but he's gonna come out on top for a long time." But that wasn't in the bingo card, so to speak.
I was in nobody's bingo card.
Because
Nobody.
we thought Apple was done, right? I remember if you remember, but it looks like Apple, the plugs are gonna be pulled and that's it.
Yeah, because they made some bets that didn't pan out. They took some risks that didn't pan out. We thought they were going to be ended by IBM and Microsoft, and they weren't
They weren't.
because they decided to operate on a whole new playing field and then build a very tight integration to their system. So they have a whole bunch of loyal users because it's so hard to switch off of it.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Think
so
about
cool.
something. You invoked IBM. If things hadn't changed, we'd all have a BlackBerry still running on in our pockets because everybody that was in business, if you were in the business world, you had a BlackBerry, and we'd probably have a streaming blockbuster on that phone, right? Those two things,
Maybe.
queries are gone, blockbusters, pretty much it's gone, right?
Yeah.
We have Netflix streaming and we're using iPhones and Google
Or
Android phones.
Paramount or Disney or
Yep.
any of the 70,000. You cut your cord 10 years ago. Not even. When did you cut your cord? You probably cut your cord. You got rid of the cable company because they were trying to charge you $200 a month for your basic package plus HBO and the sports package. So I get rid of that. You go get Hulu, it's like $60 a month. And then you got to get Paramount, which is like $20 a month. And then you got to get Peacock because your wife likes a show, and you got to get
Mhm.
Showtime, and then you got to get Apple Plus or Apple TV so you can watch that show with your kids. Then you got to get Netflix to watch the shows that are exclusive to Netflix. So now you're spending $300 a month in streaming subscriptions when
Yep.
you would be spending 190 some dollars on your full on cable package. So it's the same thing, different day. It rhymes.
It rhymes. It rhymes. Is there anything that we have not said? I want to give you a chance. You have so much experience. Again, we could leave the tape running for a couple of hours here, but I want to give you a chance to anything that your mind that you're absolutely psyched about or absolutely panicked about.
Well, I'll try to stay off the panic button because in the world of cybersecurity, it can be a world of doom and gloom. You never have enough money, you never have enough time. Everybody's always trying to break your system and you're not getting the right way to go. So I try to stay off the doom and gloom, but the way that I see things have changed over the last, I don't know, 20 years. We're not even close to how fast things are going to change in the next 20. So, as different as life is in 2026 as it was in 2006, life is going to be twice that different in 2046. And we don't even know what's coming in 2030 or 2035. So, be optimistic, be happy, embrace change, and just go forward with your head held high and keep your eyes on being 1% better today than you were yesterday. Keep
That's
learning.
great advice.
That's been my motto. I keep learning.
Mm,
I could have easily just sat on my hands and been a network engineer or a crypto tech, and I would have made a good living. I would have had a job as much as I could, but I kept learning and learning and learning, and that's how I am. Really happy about being at the forefront of AI in a couple of different companies at age 60 almost.
I want to appreciate that. I want to do this. Thank you so much, James. So much knowledge, so much wisdom. You've seen this type of movie, same but different,
Yep.
and go smooth is fast, fast is
Yep.
smooth. And to some extent, I gotta let it noodle to
Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I love that. I love that.
Yep.
And if you've enjoyed listening to James, I'm going to invite you to listen to another James, James Morrison, former cybersecurity specialist at the FBI. He had a whole lot to say about vulnerabilities as well and how those hackers are using it against us today. Go check that episode out. You're going to hear some things that may surprise you. And if you've also found this podcast to resonate, go ahead, hit that like button, share it with a friend. They're going to find it very interesting because this James that's sitting right next to me or virtually next to me on the other screen has a lot that other leaders need to hear. And whether somebody at the C suite or not, send it to a friend. They may pick up a thing or two, but like James just said, it is continuous learning that helps you move further along. I really like that because I believe in continuous learning. And I believe your friends will probably enjoy listening to something that they can learn a thing or two about. So thanks for hanging out with me today and hanging out with James Gorman. I'll see you in that episode with James Morrison.